So good evening, everybody. For those of you that have just joined us in the audience there, welcome to the Spotlight on the Artist. And this is a regular Thursday night chat with an artist, find out all about them. And tonight's artist, well, I was thinking, what can I do as a really good introduction to them? So, of course, I've found the perfect way of introducing tonight's artist.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can. Spins a web any size, catches thieves just like flies. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man.
Well, there we are. I couldn't think of a better way to introduce our artist this evening, because like me, she's a great fan of Spidey. So let's introduce her properly. From Orlando, Florida, welcome, Vanity Diaz.
Hi, Steve. I have to say, I think that is the best introduction ever.
Well, the problem for me, it's a double-edged sword, because I love the introduction there. The double edge is that I remember it live in the 60s when I was growing up. That's the problem. I listened to that live when I was a little lad in short trousers, sat in front of the telly every week, waiting for Spider-Man to come on. So when I hear that theme tune, the original 60s theme tune, it fills me with such nostalgia. But to you, it fills you with ideas for drawing, no doubt.
Yeah, it does. It's actually really funny. And I think it does give me a little bit of nostalgia too, because I remember, when God, I sound like a fetus and I'm really sorry. But in the 90s, when the Spider-Man series came out, around that time for me, I remember like sitting with my dad every Saturday morning, like a bowl of cereal, and watching like the Spider-Man series then. So yeah, so it's so funny. I love it.
So I've delved into your website and had a look at your Insta feed and everything. And you basically love drawing anything from the superhero fandom, Disney, your own original characters. You've got that soft spot for Spider-Man. So where did this all start? Because you're not that old, if I'm honest. You're a mere babe in arms, really, compared to me. But you've had such a journey with this. So just to take us back to where it all started with first of all, your love of art in general.
You know what? It's actually really funny. So I always tell my like people on my live stream on my Instagram that like this story is like the origin story per se. And as a kid, I didn't really I didn't gravitate to art. I was always an artsy fartsy kid, and I was always into the arts, but I never really saw myself really drawing. Because I was always involved in choir as a kid. Choir was always my thing, from like very beginning of school all the way up till adulthood. Really, I was always in choir, and I always excelled so much in it. So art really didn't start finding a love in my heart or a soft spot in my heart until until I was like in my God, I want to say early 20s, maybe I was 19-ish. But yeah, I started off getting into art really because I was struggling with academics and reading. So in the States, there's a mandatory test for each grade at the end of the year that you have to take, and you have to pass it to move on to the next grade level. And my teachers were telling my dad and my parents, they were like, listen, she's excelling in everything except reading. And so my dad was like, I got this, don't worry about it. So he busted out his comics and he gave me a Spider-Man comic. And I remember like flipping through the comics and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And it got me into reading. And as a kid, I grew up with comics. That was it. My dad introduced me to them. And man, throughout school, there was never a moment that I didn't have a comic book on me, that I wasn't reading a comic book. And it got me better at reading. And eventually I started like reading books and stuff like that. But comic books were always it for me. And the more I read them, the more I fell in love with the actual art itself and the illustrations. And I got to a point one day where I was like, oh, it'd be so cool to draw Spidey. And that's what happened.
Very, very clever dad. You have very, very clever dad, because most parents would go down a different route, well away from the comics, because a lot of parents see that sort of thing as being a distraction from learning. But no, very clever, because it focused you on something you really enjoyed, and obviously you wanted to know what the story said, so you would probably read with him, he would read to you, and that's how it developed. So the love of the superheroes came before the love of art, which is I suppose in a way that's a good thing, because you'd already got the basis in your head of these superheroes. And so when we talk about your art, it's always been drawing the characters, it's never wavered off into any other, you haven't sort of ventured into any other sort of art?
I've always drawn like DC and Marvel characters and Disney. I for in the beginning when I was kind of figuring out if I wanted to do art, I started off with watercolors. And it was drawing like random objects like fruits and trees and nature, more landscape. Um, but it didn't resonate with me. Like I would look at it and I'd be like, yeah, like that's good, but there's just something missing about it. There's something off with it. And I never knew what that thing was. And then later on, I switched to acrylic paints. And again, it was the same thing, working on shading and lighting with objects, drawing fruits and landscape. And I'm like, again, it's all right. I'm like, but there's something with it that just it's not there yet. And after going through watercolor, acrylics, I didn't even bother to touch oil because I was too petrified at that time. Acrylic and I fought. We didn't have a great relationship. Um, and then I just went back to pencil and paper. I would be at my job at the time. I think it was 18. I just turned 18, and 2 months later, I got a job working with my dad actually, and I would sit at my desk as I was helping with. I was a customer service representative for a QuickBooks software, and I would sit at my desk and just pencil and paper, and I'd just start doodling away and drawing these expressions and people's emotions and kind of like looking around me and seeing how frustrated my coworkers would get, and I kind of like doodle them on a piece of paper, and like I would just be giggling to myself, and I would just have so much doing expressions and things like that. And again, when I was on break, I'd look at comic books, and as soon as I started doodling like MJ's, Mary Jane's really sassy face, kind of looking at Spider-Man, like, bring it on, Tiger, like that kind of like expression. As soon as I started doodling them, I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. Like, that's like, it's totally off. Like, her nose is crooked, like, anatomy's wrong. Because at that point, it was just the very beginning for me. But I remember looking at it and going, oh my gosh, like that was it. The thing that was missing with all those landscapes and fruits and all the other things I was trying is I didn't really have a passion for it. Like I was able to do it, but I didn't really love it. And I think that's where it clicked for me.
What I always love, and it's happened since I came into this, when you're talking to an artist and they're telling you about their background, their life story, and then they hit upon talking about their true passion, the art they do now, your whole attitude and emotion changed when you started talking about those days. You can't help it. You couldn't have stopped that happening.
Yeah.
It was lovely to listen to, because I was going back in my head thinking of you sat there, supposedly a customer service assistant, and looking and doodling. And as you were telling us about that, I don't know whether you realized you were getting really excited, really enthused, and that comes out. And I think that you never try and stop that. Because it shows you've found your true zone of genius with that, because it brings you so much joy. So the only previous occupation you had then was working in this role as a customer services assistant, was it?
So the job actually, I've only had two jobs ever. The first job I had right out of high school, right when I turned 18, got it a couple months later. I worked with my dad for as a customer service representative for QuickBooks, and then I stood there for 4 years. I worked there for 4 years, and then I found a job that was paying more. And by God, it was way more complicated and way more stressful. And it was a payroll accountant for a company named Paylocity. And I loved working there because the people were amazing. But the job, I kind of found myself going, yeah, this is not it, Vanity. Like I remember having a discussion in my own head, like, man, I totally don't remember saying as a like 7, 8 year old girl, when I grow up, I want to be a payroll accountant. And I was like, man, we really got to get out of this because this isn't it. And I think I got to a point where, um, I realized that life is so short, and time flies by. You blink and a year is gone, and it's for me, I saw it as it's too short for me to allow somebody else control when I'm allowed to when I'm allowed to eat food, when I'm allowed to wake up and work for a job that it's not my passion. I can do it and I'm great at it, but it's not what I love. And I think I just came to a realization where I was like, man, life is too short to give somebody that kind of control. Like, what can I do to not have that and to do what I love and be happy? Because that's at the end of the day, like, even if I wasn't being an artist full time, like I just want to be happy with the time I have. So yeah.
That's a great mantra to have. It really is, Vanity, because a lot of people are in jobs that they would love to be able to get out of, and they may have a talent, but it takes a lot of guts to make that move and to say to yourself, yeah, as you just said, life is so short. So 4 years you stuck at this job, drawing probably
Yes.
everybody that came within your eye line. What happened then? Because you're still obviously doing art. Were you doing any art then to sell, or were you just doing it as a hobby?
Man, you know what? I think around that time, I was doodling, and like you said, I was there for 4 years, and within those 4 years, I met my first mentor, and his name was Ricardo, and I would be drawing and doodling at my desk, and he would be like, "Whoa, like you have potential." And I remember the first time he told me that, I laughed, and I kind of like brushed it off, and I was like, "Oh, thanks." And he was like, "No, no, no," like, and he could tell I was brushing it off, and he was like, "No, no, no, like you genuinely do have like potential. Like you should really like invest in time into this." And I was like, "Yeah, I don't really know." And I had the same thought that every artist has had, it's really hard to be an artist full time and make money off of it. And, it's not really a career. And then there's a whole market, and then there's a lot of competition, and there's people better than me. And he was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. He's like, I don't really care about any of that. Like you need to invest time into yourself. Like, do you like doing this? Cause it looks amazing. And I was like, yeah, it's pretty fun. And, like you said, I started getting giddy and telling him about what I do. And, it got me by, when everybody else is frustrated at work, I'd be drawing their emotions, kind of giggling to myself. And at one point he was like, all right, he's like, have you ever seen, Green Lantern comics? And I was like, no. And needless to say, Ricardo ended up being one of my closest friends at that job. Every break, every lunch session, we would even show up early for work, and we would meet up, and he would show me how to draw things. Little did I know, Ricardo is actually an amazing traditional comic book artist. So he would spend time drawing a face and like drawing the eyes incorrectly. And he would show me the drawing, and he'd be like, "What's wrong with it?" And he would try to teach me like anatomy and all these different things and tips and tricks. And he really was the one that helped me realize I actually am pretty decent. Like I could do something with this. So in that meantime, like I didn't end up selling anything really. I didn't have any like prints for sale or even a website or even an Etsy. I didn't have any of that set up. I was really just like trying to figure out how good I could get and what I could do and where my style was, and just trying to figure out the basics with him. But at that point, no, I wasn't selling anything. I was just trying to learn the basics and realizing that I might actually be good enough to keep going and push myself further.
So Ricardo, then, he worked at the same place that you worked?
Yes, we worked in the
Wow.
exact same department too. He was actually my superior in a way. So whenever I needed assistance, there was a team that we had at my job that we would go to, and then there was management. So he was right above my pay grade. But yeah, it was great. We ended up like nerding out about comics, and he got me way more into DC because when we first met, he was like, "Do you like Marvel or DC?" And I was like, "Pfft, Marvel, duh." And then he showed me DC Comics, and now I struggle with that question. So yeah, yeah, it was awesome.
Well, I mean, quite a lot of people say, "Oh, that's a great coincidence, him being there." But I'm not. I'm not a great believer in coincidences. I think the fates have a life mapped out for us in some ways. So for you to be in the same place as him was great for you, and obviously he taught you a lot. But you have your own distinct style. I've noticed that by looking. And for anybody in the audience now, if you haven't already checked out Vanity's IG account, then do so while we're talking, because you can sort of scan down it and see all sorts. So okay, so now you the impetus is there. Now the excitement is welling up inside you. You've got someone saying that you're good. You're starting to believe in yourself, and for artists, that is a big thing. That moment when you get the belief in what you are doing, and the fact that there's that barrier sometimes, isn't there, between I'm okay, I'm pretty good,
Mm-hmm.
and then I think it's sometimes to do with our pride before a fall type of thing. But you
Yeah.
realise now you're going to go for it. Take us to the next part of this exciting journey for you, then.
So at that point, I was in my so by this time, right, the entire 4 years, we've really worked together to see to get me to the basics and to push me. And then my dad actually gifted me for Christmas an iPad. It was the first generation iPad Pro with the first generation Apple Pencil. And I lied. My dad bought me the iPad. My iPad Pencil was delayed because everybody wanted an iPad and Apple Pencil, and my best friend had found one that was in stock and could be there this week. And my friend Jose Bautista at the time, he bought me my Apple Pencil, and then my dad's came in 2 weeks later. So I was fortunate enough to have two. So that way I would lose one and then find the other. But I bought my iPad, and that was towards the end of this current job. And Ricardo's like, "You have an iPad, start practicing every day. This is it. Like, you've got an iPad, you're gonna kill it. Like, I know you are." Because my biggest thing was always on pencil and paper. I can erase it, but I can't erase it completely. And once it's done, it's done. And so I was always I'm such an overthinker. So when he's like, "You have an iPad," he's like, "Oh, you can overthink all the time. You'll be able to create 15 designs and mess them all up and, come out with what you want. This is perfect, Vanity." And I remember just laughing. I'm like, "Yeah, that's a valid point." And so I spent the last year at my job that I worked for 4 years. Um, at that point they had promoted me to work on a project that I was managing other people. And so I was like, "Okay, that's perfect." I was like, "Yeah, because that gives me way more time to draw." And I kid you not, I would be at my desk, my team would be running perfectly fine, their metrics would be amazing, and I would be drawing at my desk, and I'd be working on, Starfire's expressions or Wonder Woman expressions, drawing like her tiara, like little things like that. And I had that fire ignited. And then I quit that job, and I moved on to my next job, which was at Paylocity. And I worked there for about a year and a half, almost 2 years. And man, that's when it clicked, because that job I had no time to draw. I mean, absolutely no time to draw. So I was like, "You know what? That's not going to stop me though." So I would wake up an hour early before work, and I would draw. I would bring my iPad with me, and at lunch I would be eating and I would be drawing at my desk. And on my last break, I would be drinking water and drawing. Anything I could do, any downtime that I had, I would be drawing. But I realized that this 9 to 5 was so much more than that, because tax season would come, and for the months of November, December, and January and February, we would be on blackout periods. We couldn't take any time off. And our calls and our emails, all the assistance that our clients needed, it would be through the roof. I would find myself staying at my job, clocking in at like 8 and leaving at 11 p.m. and then getting home and being ready to pass out within those months. And I was like, I was getting burnt out at that time. Like, if you know me, I will do any job that you give me to excellence. However, I will burn myself out and I'll just start hitting that rut. And I started realizing that, and that's when I realized, man, I can't do this anymore. I can't let somebody control this much of my time. If I'm going to bed at 11, I want to be happy that I'm going to bed at 11, not showing up at home at 11, grabbing a snack and then just completely passing out and ignoring everybody around me. And it really started getting to me. But throughout that time that I was there, I would draw and people would see me drawing, and then I, would be like, you know what? Yeah, I have my Instagram. You should check it out. And I believe it was a year and a half ago. That's when I met, while I was working at my job, that's when I met my friend Dominic Glover. And he posted, God, I remember it happening. I was asleep and I woke up in the middle of the night around like 11:30, 11:45 a.m. And I was like, man, all right, I guess I'm awake. That's kind of weird. I was like, I don't have to go to the bathroom. I'm not really hungry. I was like, so let me just turn on the TV. I'll just scroll on Instagram like I usually do. And I scrolled on Instagram and I saw Dominic's post. And I'd been following Dominic for a long time on Instagram. And he's just like, yeah, he's like, I'm actually looking for a couple of people to mentor. And I really want to get everybody, my goal is to give back. And I want to invest time in artists that are looking to go further than they are right now. So DM me if you're interested. Now, granted, Dominic has 89.6 followers. So Dominic is very well known and he's Marvel certified. He's worked for Marvel, DC, and just recently got hired by Netflix. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to DM him. I'm probably not going to get a reply back though, because
Go for it.
he's conquering the world. But you know what? I'm that artist. I really want to take it to the next level. And I remember messaging him and I was like, hey, Dominic, I was like, you're probably really busy. But I would love to, be considered one of your mentors or mentees if you were interested in it. I'm ready to give it my all. And I sent that and I was like, dude, it's also like 11:45 p.m. I'm not going to get a response. And so I'm just sitting there in bed and I'm about to click on Netflix and my phone lights up and it's Dominic. And he replies within minutes. And he's just like, hey, Vanity, nice to meet you. He's like, yeah, I'd love to. He's like, why don't we talk more? And I was like, oh my God. Now in my heart is like beating out of
Wow.
my chest.
Wow.
I'm
Wow.
hyperventilating. I'm freaking out. I'm like, oh my gosh, Dominic Glover is talking to me. Holy shit. Like, what do I do? Oh my gosh. I'm like, okay, play it cool. Act cool. Act cool. Like, I'm still freaking out. And
think what Spider-Man would do. Act cool.
Exactly. I was like, pull a Peter Parker. It's cool. We're cool. It's all cool. So I messaged him. Guys, I didn't play it cool. I messaged him back immediately. I'm like, whoa, I didn't think you would reply. That's so cool. Hey, yeah, nice to meet you too. I was like, yeah, I'd love to be, a mentee. So sure enough, Dominic calls me the next day. And we FaceTime and I'm losing my ever loving mind. Like mentally I'm screaming.
How did you cope with that? Because he's obviously fangirling over him and then he rings you.
Oh yeah, I was definitely in my brain, I was hyperventilating. I remember he was like, "Hey, can I call you tomorrow at this time?" And I worked at that exact time. And I was like, "Absolutely you can." I called my job. I was like, "Yeah, I'm out sick today." I was like, "I'm really sorry. Cough, cough. I gotta go." And they were like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm really sorry." I was like, "I'm so sick." And my boss was like, "All right." I was like, "Yeah, I'm so sorry. I know it's last minute, but that's how the flu or the cold works, right?" So all right, bye. And I took the day off and I sat by my phone waiting and I was hyperventilating and freaking out. And then he rings me, he FaceTimes me and he's like, hey, and I'm screaming in my head. I'm freaking out. The bells and whistles are going off. And again, I pull a Peter Parker. I'm like, play it cool, play it cool. And I was like, hey, how are you? And like, I could not help but smile super big. And he could tell I was nerding out. And he's just like, I'm great. And he was this super down to earth guy. And he was like, so where do you want to start? what are you struggling with? And I mean, I went over everything with him. I was like, all right, this is it. This is what I struggle with, the fundamental, the basics. I'd love to do this. I'd love to work on this. Where do we go? And that was the story itself. From that day, Dominic and I have never stopped talking. We have always messaged each other. If not, we're always calling each other. And I can actually tell you, he is one of my closest friends now. And he talks to me all the time. And I'm actually on Clubhouse because of Dominic now.
Stop hyperventilating now. I can hear it in your voice.
I know. I'm like, oh my gosh, it was so crazy. Yeah.
That's
So,
brilliant. I mean,
yeah.
that is such a. You just happen to wake up at that time and just happen to, all these things. It's amazing when we look back at the things that have happened in our lives, the major turning points, those little moments where if I hadn't been crossing the road at that point, if I hadn't stopped to do my shoelace up, I wouldn't have seen so and so. And it's the same, and I think we just have to roll with those. We just have to run with those because there's something greater going on, I think, that we don't know about, that's guiding us.
Yeah.
And it's certainly guiding you
without
in
a
the right
doubt.
direction. So now you have this mentor who's helping you. You've obviously keep your style. You don't adopt his. You keep your style. What did you give up your job straight away, or did you leave it a bit? How did that happen?
So I talked to Dominic for a long time about quitting my job because he got to a point where he would tell me, he would ask me, he would say, well, are you happy like doing your job? Because he knew who I worked for and did. And every day I would get frustrated that I worked at this job. He would tell me, he'd be like, all right, so like, what have you drawn? Like, let's talk about it. What are you doing? And he would keep me on that path. And I would say it was actually December of 2020 that I quit my job. I had actually told my boss, my boss asked me on the very first day that I got hired. She was like, "Hi, my name's Amira. Nice to meet you." And we talked about the basics of the job. And she goes, "So what is it like? What's your goal?" And I was like, that corporate question. I was like, my goal is to be the best in the company. And she goes, oh, well, like, that's great. But like, what's your goal like outside of this company too? And I like paused and I looked at her and I'm like, ooh, maybe this is like the fourth side of the interview. And they like throw out this random question. And then if you answer, I want to be something better outside of the company, you lose your job. Like in my head, I was like, I've never been asked this question before. And I don't know if I should answer it honestly. So I just stared at her for a second and she just laughed and she's like, no, you can be honest. And I was like, all right. I was like, my goal is to be a comic book illustrator full time. And I just looked
Yes.
at her like, ugh.
See, a lot of people, Vanity, a lot of people wouldn't have said that. They would have hid behind the sort of the safety net of I need to make sure this job is, and I'll won't touch people about my real aspirations for my future. But you went out there and you said it. I bet that made you feel good, did it?
Oh, it did. I think because I've said it to Dominic a million times, but that was somebody that was in my art world. That was somebody that was in my community. And so to say it out loud in real life per se, I just kind of watched her expression afterwards. And she was like, that's awesome. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, oh, thank God I didn't lose my job because that would have sucked. I was like, all right, cool. And she supported me immediately right off the bat. She supported me. She followed my Instagram. She liked my post. She saw everything
Oh
I was doing.
wow.
And she was like, you're like really talented. And I was like, oh, well, like, thank you. I appreciate that. I was like, yeah, I'm working on it. And then I think it was God, I think it was almost a year into the job. I told her, I was like, hey, I know you celebrate my victories with me. I was like, I just want to let you know, I'm actually being mentored by a Marvel illustrator. His name's Dominic. And she was like, oh my gosh, this is it. You're gonna become famous. Just remember me. Like I'm like your really cool boss that like we've had drinks with and like watched animes with. Like she became a really great friend of mine. And so I kind of laughed. She's like, when you're famous, just like remember me. And I'm like, oh God, I'm like,
Oh, that's so
I'm far
lovely.
from that. It's
That
fine.
is lovely. It could
Yeah, it was great.
it could have gone the other way, couldn't it? So easily. Bosses aren't always like that. So no,
No.
that is lovely. So that's only quite recently, then, November 2020. You
Yeah.
quit your job.
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow.
It was
So
it was great,
okay. So
honestly.
let's get to the now then, shall we? Because you quit your job
Hmm.
fairly recently. You've
Good.
are you still being mentored by Dominic in a way?
Um, I guess you could say yes. I don't know. It's weird. Like I still go to him when I'm like, hey, does this lighting look good? But it's not necessarily as like focused on the basics like it used to be, to where he would mentor me on every little thing. Now it's like, hey, does like this look all right? And then he's like, yeah, I love it. I'm like, okay, cool. And then it's kind of like it's more born into like a like an art friendship per se, where you get somebody else's perspective on what you're creating. So yes and no, I guess. I'll always consider him my mentor. I don't think that'll
Yeah.
ever change.
To have somebody there that you can bounce things off, somebody so high up in their field is great, and I think not enough artists actually take the benefit of those sort of people. I'm sure there are a lot of people, a lot of artists that are high up in their field that would only love to give back to other artists if they just ask. And you don't seem
Mhm.
the sort of person now that shies away from asking.
I oh man, I do, but you know what? Just talking about my story and kind of looking over it again, I don't think it's ever been me being scared of asking. I really think it's just been me being so blessed. I think it's just been, God kind of helping me be bold when I needed to be, because I promise I am such an introvert. When I don't know people, I'm in a room that I don't know, and I'll make quirky. I'm so much a Peter Parker. It's so sad. Like I'll make like really dorky dad jokes when I don't know what to do. And I'm just there like, okay, cool. But
That's why
yeah,
you
no.
identify. That's why you identify with him so well, I think. But it's we are blessed sometimes, but also it's not what life gives us; it's what we do with it that really
Yeah.
matters, I think.
Mm.
So, can we go on into your actual art now? Because
Yeah.
I, you probably noticed, I woke up in the middle of the night last night for the bathroom. And what did I do? I jumped on a Vanity Diaz live at something like
Yeah.
3:30 in the morning over here. I thought, oh, that'd be interesting. And you were chatting away with a fellow artist. You were both on the screen doing your art. So
Yes.
then I got the questions in my head to ask you today was, first of all, what are your favourite characters to draw? I know you're going to say Spidey, but let's put Spidey to one side. What are your favourite characters to draw?
Um, my favorite character to draw is I'd say probably Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman's one of
Mhm.
my favorites. If not her, I recently had fun drawing Punchline. She's hands down, I think, one of my favorite characters that I've drawn in the past. But if anybody was like, hey, on the spot, draw someone, I'd be like, all right, Wonder Woman, let's go. She's my go-to.
And you could do that on the spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, God, I'm just sick of this talented person.
No.
So,
No.
one thing that's come up a lot during this conversation we're having, and right back to when you worked at your first job, and I'm wondering if this is where you start with a character. Do you start with the expression, whether it's in your head or whether it's on the screen? Is that where you start? You mentioned expression so many times, the expression of somebody.
Yeah, I do actually. I think I mentioned expression a lot because when I was starting off in the basics, I only knew how to draw like eyes, nose, eyebrows, and a mouth. I didn't fully understand the anatomy of like the base shape of a head, or like how to do like angles of a head. So I did start off with just like expressions like that were floating around. They weren't even attached to like circles or heads or anything. They were just random expressions all over a page. So yeah, I do start off with the expression first with my characters, and then I'm like, okay, so If she's feeling like sassy, then is she going to be full on front facing? No, probably not. She's probably going to be at like an angle, and then I kind of build from there.
And do you have in your head, when you're drawing a character, any sort of backstory to why you're drawing them? Is there any sort of thing going on emotion wise between you and them?
I wouldn't say it's between me and them, but I definitely do picture like a comic strip, if that makes sense. So like if I'm drawing,
Yeah, perfectly. Yeah.
like just recently I drew Storm, right? And when I was drawing Storm, I was like, all right. And I looked at all the comic strips and I pulled all of my references because I'm such a reference nerd. It's not even funny. I will pull references for everything. And in my head, I'm like, all right, it's Storm. She's really confident. And as I'm looking at all the comic strips, like, yeah, she laughs and stuff. However, most of the time, she's always poised and she's ready for anything thrown at her, or she's got her eyes on a focal point and she's really hyper focused on like an enemy that's facing her. And so in my head, whenever I draw those characters, I'm usually like, all right, this is Storm and she's going to be looking at that guy like, take one more step, like, and I'll throw that lightning bolt kind of thing. So I picture it more of like what she would be doing in the comics when I get like the expressions and when I'm drawing them.
That's exactly what I'm looking at her now, and the mouth's closed, the jawline set. She's looking that steely gaze ahead. So yeah. But it's just also just with the little lines of the shoulders that sort of sense as though she's ready to move. It's great.
Yeah.
It's brilliant, just brilliant. So you've got this range of characters, and do you also create your own characters?
I created a comic book character with my dad about a year and a half ago. And that I will say, I can't say much about her because I promised my dad I wouldn't until we got her copyrighted. But That's lot fine. Of it my dad helped me create. And every once in a while I'll draw her and I'll be like, hey dad, like, and I always show my dad all of my artwork, even when it's in sketch mode.
Absolutely.
I always show him, I'm like, hey, what do you think of this? And he's like, oh my gosh. Like, I love showing my dad stuff because you could tell the nerd in him comes out and then the dad, because I'll show him like a picture of Storm and he'll be like, whoa, that's so sick. Like, look at her eyes. Like, oh my goodness. And then he'll be like, but I'm really proud of you. And then the dad comes out and he's like, wow, you're making great treadway. So yeah. So
and he'll say things like, have you eaten properly? Have you eaten properly today? Vanity will say, and things like that. Us dads always
He will. He always does.
So currently then, what's on the go? What's the main focus of Vanity at the moment then?
So I just tomorrow I'll be releasing 2 more tiers to my Patreon. So I'm really excited about that. Because I'm obsessed with my Patrons. They're great. I do everything for them and I try to make sure that I can give them all the behind the scenes on stuff that I'm working on, because I just feel like Patreon and my patrons, it's like a personal connection to have with them, rather than just like people who might follow me on Instagram. I still love my followers more than anything, but I just feel like when you're a patron, like I can give you a little bit more of that one-on-one relationship and like talk to you and get to know you, and I love that. And then for Prince, I have Spider-Verse Into the Spider-Verse series that of stickers that'll be released at the end of this month. And then I also have a character that I'm working on right now, and she is Wonder Woman. Her name is Nubia. She's actually Wonder Woman's long lost twin sister. And I'm drawing her for Black History Month, and I'm really, really excited.
Oh, so these stickers, are they available to ship to the UK by any chance?
They will be available to ship to the
UK. Sorry, I've got to be professional here. Oh, that's wonderful news. Well done. That's very nice news to hear.
Play it cool, Steve.
Play it cool. Peter Parker.
There you go.
So brilliant. The future then, what's your ambition? I mean, I can't believe it's 6:36 over here. We've been chatting away. It's been brilliant. We are going to get some questions from the audience, I hope. So if you want to hit your buttons in a minute, hit your little hands. When I've finished, we can have some questions. So what's the future hold? What's your immediate goal, your long-term goal?
Man, I think my immediate goal is just to make more art, make more prints for my website that people can view and enjoy. Long-term goal in the future is to create original characters that people will buy as well, and hopefully find myself working for Marvel and DC.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's going to happen, isn't it? It's got to happen. I mean, it's just going to happen. You know, Dominic will retire and you'll step into his shoes. There's no there's no doubt about it. I mean, art has always been seen by artists that really do love what they do as a therapy. Do you see your art as being a therapy for you? If you've had one of those shite days, do you pick up your Apple pen?
You know what? I would say yes and no. For me, whenever I'm having a really hard day, sometimes it is hard for me to draw. The best drawings I create are when I'm really happy. And sometimes the pieces that take a little bit longer are probably because like I've had an off day and I just like I step away from it all just to make sure that I'm a clear mind, and then I kind of come back. But you know what? There are some days where they're just like so hectic and so crazy that I'm like, yeah, I need to block out everybody. Let me go draw Wonder Woman again. Like it just, you know what? Peter Parker's calling me. I'll be right back. Yeah.
Your go-to, yeah. I think we've all got a go-to when we're not feeling up to it. We got one that it's almost like a safety net, isn't it? You draw Wonder Woman as a
Yeah.
safety net because you know that you
Yes.
could almost do with your eyes closed. And
Yeah.
So let's have some contacts then, because people, you mentioned your Patreons. If somebody wanted to
Yeah.
support you, where do they go for that?
So you can go straight to my Instagram, and there is a link in my bio. It should take you to my link tree. And it should have my Patreon link right there. It should be the third option on my link tree. It'll say Patreon. So they
Brilliant.
can go
And you
there
can,
and support me.
and also on your link tree, there's also access to your website with the shop and everything. People can buy prints and all that.
Yep. So there's going to be a link for prints, and then I also put a separate link for everybody to pre-order the Miles Morales that I released. That was the first one I released because there were a lot of people that were excited about it.
We haven't spoken about this Miles Morales because quite a lot of people wouldn't understand his connection with the Spider-Man. Can you just explain that for us?
Yeah, of course. So, if nobody saw it, as everybody knows, there is always Spider-Man Peter Parker in our universe, but in the comics, there's another universe, and it's completely separate from ours, and that Spider-Man dies, and Miles Morales takes control. He actually gets bitten by a radioactive spider, and this is a kid who, you know, is in New York in the depths of it. He's in, I believe he's in Brooklyn, Bronx. I'm pretty sure he's in Brooklyn. But he's a half black, half Puerto Rican kid, you know, younger than Peter Parker was when he got his powers. I believe Miles Morales in the comics is 12. And then Peter Parker is like 14 or 15. But yeah, Miles is even younger than Peter, and he's again not only trying to figure out his identity, but he's trying to figure out how powers work and how can there be more than one Spider-Man. Is he supposed to be the new Spider-Man? And then universes collide, and Miles Morales meets our universe is Peter Parker, and yeah, that's how the story begins, or that's how it goes.
Brilliant. And you've drawn this character, and there'll be stickers available for him?
Say that again?
Will there be stickers available of this particular one, or Miles Morales one?
Yes, yeah. So
Yeah.
Miles Morales right now is for pre-order. All of the shipments will be done March 1st. So I'm keeping track of all the pre-orders that are coming in through my website. So yeah, you can find that link in my Instagram bio as well.
Fantastic. And for people that maybe have just joined the audience a bit late today, don't worry, you won't miss this completely, because what I'm going to do, it's being recorded, just the interview between myself and Vanity. So if anybody comes up on stage to ask questions, that will not be recorded. And there'll be a YouTube channel started up next week with my interviews each week going on to the YouTube channel, and the montage of work going above that, so you can look at the art flowing by while you listen to the interview. So just a way of people catching up. And also the people that aren't on Clubhouse that I'm telling about this room, it gives them a chance also to find out about the artist without having to be a member of Clubhouse.
So as of right now, I'm a full-time freelance artist. So I pretty much draw, needless to say, lack of better words, I draw what I want and what I'm kind of like visioning for that month. And then I'll actually post it onto like my website for prints to be sold and stuff like that. And I'll take on commission like requests from other people. But I personally don't actually interview for like Marvel or DC as of right now. When you do though, and if this is something that you're looking to do, what you can do, I will say it's probably a lot harder than it was like 10 years ago, because 10 years ago you could walk in portfolio and be like, hey, this is what I have. Do you like it? And then, you'd kind of work your way in. But now it's definitely a little more tight knit. You can't exactly walk into Marvel headquarters nowadays. But I would say you can either reach out to them directly, because I know if you go to Marvel's website, even on their Instagram, there's always like a contact page, and make sure you have a portfolio ready with all of your stuff. So if it's kind of like a dress for the job you want, if you're going to draw Spider-Man, make sure you have a million Spider-Man poses done and sketched out, fully colored. Every kind of range that you have of Spider-Man, make sure that you have it done, versus, going to apply to draw or color Spider-Man and then you have a whole bunch of Wonder Woman. So yeah, that would be something that I would say. I go live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I was like, oh man, like maybe I should just go live like once a week or twice a week. And then I I remember like I was like, I should probably just ask my followers. It'll be fine. So I just put up a question for my followers, and they were like, no, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday works perfectly fine. We actually like a schedule, so that worked out.
Yeah, but of course for me it's always that 3 o'clock in the morning, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. I'm so sorry. I tried to do
Don't
some
apologize.
of them earlier.
Don't apologize. I can always set my alarm. It's been a wonderful, almost an hour with you. This is what I like about this room. I know we've chatted in other rooms, but it gives me a chance, and or the audience a chance, to get to know you as a person. And even though you're only mid-20s, I presume now.
Yeah,
You've
24.
done a heck of a lot in those years. But it's the drive and the determination that you've got to fulfill your ambition, and will also get you to that comic strip illustrator that you want. I have got no doubt about that. And I want to be the person that
Thank
says,
you so
I
much.
interviewed her first on Clubhouse. Thank you so much again for being my guest this evening. And folks, we've got another one of these next week. So please join us next Thursday, 6 p.m. GMT, for another spotlight on the artist.